When Jesus had spoken these words, he lifted up his eyes to heaven and said, Father, the hour has come. Glorify your Son, that the Son may glorify you. Since you have given him authority over all flesh to give eternal life to all whom you have given him. And this is eternal life, that they know you, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom you have sent. I glorified you on earth, having accomplished the work that you gave me to do. And now, Father, glorify me in your own presence with the glory that I had with you before the world existed. I have manifested your name to the people who you gave me out of the world. Yours they were, and you gave them to me, and they have kept your word. Now they know that everything that you have given me is from you. For I have given them the words that you gave me, and they have received them and have come to know in truth that I came from you. And they have believed that you sent me. I'm praying for them. I'm not praying for the world, but for those whom you have given me, for they are yours. All mine are yours, and yours are mine, and I am glorified in them. And I am no longer in the world, but they are in the world, and I am coming to you. Gary, what do you think?
I kept getting caught up in the Greek and some of the different, word constructions. And I hate to say it, it's like I don't know what to make of them, but they were very interesting. And so when it talks about eternal life in the Gospel of John, the phrase that's frequently used is when it talks about eternity is eis ton ione, into the eternal. And it's funny because when Jesus lifts up his eyes to heaven, it's the same construction. It's eis ton uranos. He's looking up into the heavens. And so there's this parallel construction, but there's also a parallel construction when it talks about the cosmos or the world. Instead of eis ton, into it, it's ek. It's the exact opposite, out of the world. And so there's this motion that's taking place throughout this whole dialogue where we're moving out of the world and into the heavens. We're transcending these two spheres of existence. And that was just something that popped in my head, and I didn't know what to make of it, what the theological importance of it was, why John is doing that, or if I'm just seeing something that's not really there. It might just be normal Greek. This is the way we say things, and I'm seeing more into it. But this idea of motion just was really stood out to me. It was very significant.
Yes, when I was going through the interlinear Bible, just that phrase, out from the world,
Yes.
they emphasize that. They're saying that, they were saying, the interlinear Bible was saying, look, the way in which this Greek phrase is used is not how we use words. I mean, this motion, that it is kind of arising out of the world. So this tremendous motion that is coming from this great almost receptacle and rising up from that. So that it's exactly, they were making exactly the same point that you're making, that it emphasizes that great movement.
Awesome. The next thing that popped up to me is, as we know from the very beginning of the Gospel of John, it says, in the beginning was the Word, and it uses the word logos. here in chapter 17, he switches his construction, he switches his word, and he actually refers to words with a different Greek word, with the word rhema. And he says, I've given and they have received my words, my rhema, the spoken words, or the teachings. But what's interesting is then the things that we keep is the logos. And if we identify logos with Jesus as we have in chapter 1:1, and we're carrying that same idea here into 17, what's interesting is we may receive the words or the teaching, but what we keep is not a gnosis, that's sitting there in the head. What we're keeping is the personality, is Jesus himself, is what is being kept. And so this idea, yes, Katie just popped it up in the chat, rhema meaning the sayings. Sometimes there's a distinction between the rhema and the logos. But right here in chapter 17, it was peculiar that he inserts this word rhema as that what we see or what we receive, but then talks about the things that we keep. God keeps us. He has possessed us and holds us. All that you have given me, you have kept. We keep teachings, or we keep the commandments, and the command is to love one another, and we keep Jesus, and there's this embodied sense that when we keep Jesus, we keep the love, like it says in First John, that God is love, and that's how we know who we are, is by our ability to capture and embody that love. So
May
that
I
was the second point that stood out to me.
may I comment on that one? Thank you. So this is really very deep, because and Aquinas does a beautiful job of describing this. This is word of the Father. So this is the word spoken by the Father. So it's coming from the Father. It is the word, but it is word of the Father. And the word initially is in the consciousness, just like words, it's thought. And then it is spoken out. It also becomes flesh. So there is this thing that is coming from God, which is truth. It captures the truth. It contains the truth. And then it becomes flesh and lives amongst us. So this saying is the logos being, word being flesh, because there is word in your mind, and then there is word that is spoken, which becomes part of the word. So this entire connection between the eternal and the ephemeral, the eternal flowing into the ephemeral, it is God coming to the world through the word, through the spoken word, through the bodily expression, manifestation of it. And all these words are like intermediate connections, one focusing on this, one focusing on the other part, and all of them are kind of linked together. So go ahead, Gary.
No, I like how you bring that up, the difference between the eternal and the ephemeral, because to me, and this is getting a little bit into like Greek philosophy, is I think John is there having some tension with Platonism and Neoplatonism, where they say that what really matters are these ideas and these eternal forms that don't have a substantial reality. The reality is actually a shadow of it, an imperfect reflection of the reality that's up there, the stuff that's here in the world. And what John is literally saying is that you have, the reality of the forms, but it doesn't mean anything unless it's actually embodied in a substantial way. And so comparing the rhema, which might be the ideas, is their path, it's almost like he's saying the ideas and the forms are passing away until they become embodied in some substantial way, and then they have substance that they can be kept. And as the prayer continues, Jesus is talking about how the name of God has been manifested. And then he points to the disciples as the embodiment of God's divine character is manifested in the world through the disciples. They've done this. Your name is there and it's being shown, and people can now see God through them. And so that got me. That was, for me, that was really significant. And then you go, Shrikant, then I have my other points.
Sure. I mean, I like the way in which the text reads here. So he says, let's see here. I have manifested your name to the people whom you gave me out of this world. It manifested the name. So it's like the name here is not name. It is the character. No, this is the meaning here is I have made you known. I have manifested the unmanifest to these people. So yours they were, and you gave them to me, and they have kept your word. Okay. So yours they were. So they were yours. That's one part of it. You gave them to me. That's the second part. And they have kept your word. So you can see there is this thing is that it is, the grace is raining on, the God of the grace of God is raining on these folks. And through that, again and again, Jesus is always very humble. He says, you gave them to me. They were yours. Everything is yours. You gave them to me. And then you're saying they kept the word. So that is another characteristic. So it's like, firstly, they were yours. They were with me. And they took the word. And not only I gave them the word, but they received it. So they said yes to the word. So through the word, I was able to manifest you to them. So it's just beautiful of how, kind of a whole series of ideas are used to kind of express that. Go ahead, Gary.
So the second part that kind of stood out for me was in let's see if I can find it. It's what's interesting is in verse 9. Oh, actually, Nalini raised her hand, and so let's pause for a moment. Do you have a question, Nalini?
No, I will talk about it later, but it was actually, let me just give me a second so I can look at it. I was just going to talk about a little bit what you said, raise the eyes to heaven. And I was looking at the translation that Shrikant had sent, and I thought that it was beautiful. The way he prayed is that he lifted up his eyes to heaven. But then he talks about that there is a difference between the prayer of Christ and our own prayer. Our prayer arises solely from our needs, whereas the prayer of Christ is more for our instruction for those, or for there is no need for him to pray for himself, it's for the others. So that kind of touched my heart, that the way he raises his eyes and he prays, and the difference between the way we pray and the way he's praying. So just wanted to make a comment.
Oh, that's awesome.
Oh, thank you.
It's I think I might have mentioned it before, that in a lot of the commentaries, pretty much universally, they divide the chapter into three sections. Jesus prays for himself. He then prays for the disciples who are there. And so through the verses that we've read today, we cover the first two parts, and then he prays for the future disciples and that go beyond. And so I really like what you had to say about that he doesn't need anything. And so even the prayer for himself, to the Father, is a prayer for others. He's bringing the petitions of others before him. And that is just so beautiful. um I think one of the things that I was looking at, let's see if I can find the verse, is that you have this prayer in in chapter 17, verse 9, he's praying. um but in chapter 14, as he talks about prayer also, and he says, if you ask me anything in my name, I will do it. If you love me, you will keep my commandments. um I will ask the Father, and he'll give you another helper, so that he may be with you forever. And the helper is the Spirit of truth, whom the world cannot receive, because it does not see him or know him. But you know him, because he remains with you and will be in you. And so it's the whole, here we are. I ask on their behalf. I do not ask on behalf of the world, but on behalf of those whom you have given me, because they are yours. This idea of Jesus praying for his disciples, I don't know, that I just saw like this, when he asks, he says, whatever we ask for and we pray for, we will receive. It seems to me to be related to that embodiment of the Spirit. And that, we're back to that Stoic idea that if we have the thing, the eternal life or the eudaimonia, if we have the virtues, that they're self-sufficient. They're sufficient, you know, um, and necessary. They're all, you have the whole picture. You don't need anything else. And so there's this picture of what Jesus is communicating here, is that it's like when you have love, when you're in a relationship. I've heard this story so many times from especially newlywed couples, where the happiest part of their marriage is when they were so broke and they didn't have anything, and they drove through the drive through a McDonald's and lied to tell them that they didn't get ketchup with their burgers, just so they could have condiments to go home and eat whatever poor food that they had left over. These little things that are going on, it's a trial, but you're spending this trial with somebody that you love, and you're sitting on the floor of your new apartment with no furniture, eating ketchup that you stole from McDonald's, to enjoy macaroni and cheese or something like that. And there's just something special, like in that moment, you have nothing, but you need nothing. Certainly we would like to have more stuff, but there's something beautiful there, that no matter how much more stuff we have, we couldn't capture it. And I think that's what's going on throughout the Gospel of John, in the promise of the Holy Spirit. And when Jesus is talking about, the things that we ask for, it's not the stuff of the world. It's that intimacy. And that if we have that kind of love, if we have that communion and that bonding, there's nothing else that we really need. It's sufficient in itself. And if I could be so arrogant as to say, that's one of the things I really enjoy about having you, Nalini, here, is how genuine your responses are. And it's always enlightening, whatever you have to say. And so it's just nice to have you here in this meetup.
Thank you so much.
And that, the last point I wanted to bring up is verse 10. It's penultimately right there before the end of our reading for today. It says, and all things that are mine are yours, and yours are mine, and I have been glorified in them. And what stood out to me in this, and I don't have any profound commentary on it, it's not particularly enlightening, but what stood out to me is that John is writing this gospel far after the fact of this occurrence. The resurrection has already happened. Maybe a generation or two has already transpired. And so he writes this verse, all is mine. I say, all things that are mine are yours, and yours are mine, and I have been glorified in them. That this whole thing is a retrospective, looking back on it. And at the same time, he's saying it's a present reality. For the disciples are already dead, most of them. They've already gone on. Most of them, if we read church history, they've all gone on and were martyred, with the exception of John himself. And so we have maybe the second or the third generation of people after the resurrection are here reading the Gospel of John. And so there's this sense that this is a message to them, that all that is mine is yours, and yours is mine. And so that really, looking at this whole dialogue as a retrospective, kind of added a new flavor onto the whole meaning of the text. And that's really all I got out of this. And so I guess next up is Joe.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just make a brief comment about, I guess it was verse 8. For I gave them the words you gave me, and they accepted them. They knew with certainty that I came from you, and they believed that you sent me. I mean, I think that there's this relationship that between God the Father and Jesus, and then Jesus and his disciples, and their acceptance of grace within that. So the words that he's used, not only has he embodied the words, but he's provided them with an example on a number of different occasions on how to live and how to execute their given tasks, which is to carry on the word of God. So I think this speaks to the role of the disciples moving forward. And all I have is yours, and I think this is what you just talked about, Gary, and all you have is mine, and glory has come to me through them. Basically, that there is a accessibility to the divine that you can talk about within that line, in the sense that all I have is yours and all you have is mine, and glory has come to me through them. And so I think that in a way that Christ is basically, basically he's saying that this everlasting life, or these teachings, and the reward, the fruits that come with them, are accessible to each and every one of us. I guess if you look at verse 6, I revealed to you, to those whom you gave me out of the world. They were yours, you gave them to me, and they have obeyed your word. And I guess, again, this comes back to talking about that the disciples, in spite of some of their faults, have by and large actually followed Jesus. And by following Jesus and his teachings, I think this is an important part if we're talking about individuals that have come out of darkness and come into the light. They've heard the word. And this comes back to the initial um, opening phrase, in the beginning was the word, and the word was with God. So that the disciples actually heard this calling, and they've accepted the teachings of Christ. So I think that there's like those three kind of things. This is a lot about Christ's relationship with God, but also the disciples' relationship and their with God and their responsibilities after the crucifixion as well. So I think a lot of other passages I've been feeling up until now, Christ has really been preparing them for obviously his death, but also this seems to he seems to be speaking to the Father as these are the individuals that are going to carry on your word. So anyway, those are just some thoughts initially. And anyway, I think it's a recognition of the faith that they've shown towards Christ.
Thank you, Joe. Gary, would you like to respond?
Those two verses that Joe brought up, those were actually the two verses that stood out to me that me and Shrikant were a little bit talking about, where you have this play on the word rhema and logos. And so in verse 8 is when he says the words that you have given me, that's the rhema, the instruction I have given to them, and they have received them. But then when you go up to between verse 6 and then at the end, it uses the word logos. It says, they were yours, and you gave them to me, and your word they have kept. And so that's this interesting thing, is that the word that they kept is the word logos there. And this is where I was just kind of exploring. I'm not going to say anything definitive, is that, both logos and rhema can mean like just something, just a word. It can be a written word, it can be an instruction, it could be anything. But was there an intention behind this choice of words here in the Gospel of John? Because I think in your translation it uses the word obeyed, but the word there for obeyed is to guard or to keep, or it's a bit more. And that's the same word that's used later on when we get down to verse 11 and 10, when it talks about God keeping us. And so I was just wondering if there was something about the embodied word of Christ when it talks about that, is when he said, if Jesus is in some sense referring to himself in the third person, saying, you've kept me. And so there's this idea is that we're not just guarding an instruction in a Platonic idea, but that we're guarding the embodiment of Jesus through our own lives. And so I'm kind of speculating there. I'm definitely not the biblical scholar I want to be. But that was something that kind of like stood up to me. Kind of like that Stoic ideal. It's the virtues are just virtues until you practice them, until they're embodied, and in some sense, the virtues, at least in the Gospel of John, are inseparable from Jesus himself. The Spirit is there dwelling within us. When we embody the virtues, we're actually embodying God in a theotic essence. We're manifesting God's divine presence, and that's how the virtues live through us. And so it's a bit, it's like it's like the virtue ethics on steroids. The divine virtue ethics in a way. What do you think, Joe?
I think it's the virtue ethics come, into being right in front of us, and essentially this is, and we discussed a little bit about this with the idea of uh, taking up the cross as being the ultimate way of demonstrating that. Offering up his life for the disciples, or the world in this case. Offering up his life for the world to be redeemed, is a demonstration of that no sacrifice is too great for us. We went into this last week a little bit, and I think that that's kind of where he's having a conversation about that these individuals have actually, they're going to be the ones to carry on his message, and so I think we're getting into the deep relationship that Christ has with his disciples. I mean, we've talked about it, but even up until now, I feel like Christ has still been critiquing them and preparing them for the role that they'll play future in the church, in the sense that even when he's washing Peter's feet, and Peter's feet, he doesn't necessarily want them to be washed because he feels like that that he wouldn't be worthy. But there is almost an element of pride that exists within that, that he knew better than Christ. Or even, in subsequent, predictions that Christ had made, that the disciples did not necessarily believe that they would ever occur, that end up occurring. I think that there's that Christ is kind of critiquing and actually continually teaching all the way up until this part of the text is where he's actually speaking to the Father, and saying, these are the individuals that have followed me all the way through. Their obedience, will be rewarded. I think that's significant. Anyway, those are my just initial. I have some others as well. I mean, I think that this actually what you start to see is the relationship between Christ, the Father, and the disciples here. That would be that major distinction that I would make out of these passages versus everything else that we've read up to this point. It's a culmination of that relationship. And so, yeah, I think that's a significant turning point.
Gary,
Anyone, I was going to ask if anyone else had anything they wanted to say before I bogart the conversation.
I do have something, but I'm gonna let you go first because I think mine's just gonna take it in a different, it's kind of the same direction, but a little pivot a little bit. But if anybody else has any questions or comments, please feel free to type exclamation point in the chat. After Gary, it will be Penny.
I was going to say, I really liked what you said, Joe, about that, and especially about Peter. And one of the things that stood out to me is some of you might know that my dad has dementia, and so he's in memory care now, and he's requested this because he's afraid if he wanders off that he won't be able to find his way home. He wants to be in a secure place where people look after him, and all of that. But at the same time, whenever I meet with him, I meet with him most every day. We go on walks together. He's preoccupied with the fact that he's a burden, to me, and that I have to go live my life, and I can't spend all of my time living here in a strange city and visiting him all the time. He wants me to go do that. And that kind of stuck out to me in relationship to the foot washing and this whole dialogue, is how reluctant, maybe it's our own hubris, our own pride, is how reluctant we are to be served. And so, that's part of this whole thing, is that we're going to serve everybody that's in need, and sometimes that person that's in need might even be us. And so I've used the analogy of the foot washing with my dad a few times. Says, it's okay, Frank, to let somebody else wash your feet for once. This is the time for that. You don't have to be arrogant at this time. You don't have to be worried about being a burden. There's something beautiful about you needing this, that it allows other people the opportunity to be humble and to serve you. And for a moment he's able to get that. He usually loses it, but he's able to get it for just a moment. What were you going to say, Joe?
No, I think that is an absolute profound point, in the sense that it is, sometimes people don't like to serve, but sometimes people don't like to receive. And it's both are necessary. And yeah, I've been in positions where I don't necessarily want to receive a gift. And what we have to remember is that, the reward that we get when we provide service, we would be denying someone else that same gift if we didn't necessarily receive properly and appropriately. So that is a very, very deep insight of the relationship that we have with each other, how everything is kind of give and take, and how complementaries actually really do work in relationships. And I think that we have to look at it from what we're bringing to the relationship, what service we can provide, what would be the just thing to do. But sometimes the just thing to do is to allow yourself to be helped. And that means putting aside pride. And so that's a profound insight, again, that's another lesson that I think Christ has left us with, in the sense that, that grace means to be able to receive and to give.
Thank you, Joe. Up next, we have Penny, followed by Mona.
Okay, I just wanted to talk about one of the verses that I liked here, and it's toward the beginning. And when he says, basically at the very beginning, when Jesus had spoken these words, he lifted up his eyes to heaven and said, Father, the hour has come. Glorify your Son, that the Son may glorify you, since you have given him power over all flesh, to give eternal life to all whom you have given him. And this is eternal life, that they know you, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom you have sent. And I was just kind of struck by kind of like the summary of the whole work that was Jesus' work in the world, was simply to make God known and himself as the messenger. And he was given power over flesh, and the world to turn it into eternal. And by knowing these facts, that is eternal life. It's to realize your position in the world related to God and Jesus, that and if you know that, then you are already elevated from the world of the flesh into the world more eternal or, you know, the immaterial world. And I just thought that seemed to be something that hadn't been stated that I could remember as clearly coming up to that, because it was talking about, you know, how you should act and what you should do toward one another. But here he's kind of said, okay, this is the job I was sent to do, and you know, and I have done it. And by you knowing these things, you have come out of the world of the flesh into, you know, the world of the spirit, or the immaterial world.
Thank you, Penny. Just really quick, I love when you talked about the eternal world. I'm paraphrasing, but you were saying that in the eternal world is here, like on earth, when you're following the will of God, right, for your life, or knowing where you are and where you're supposed to be at in this world. Like, it's not some separate thing. It's a thing that you have in the present moment, which affects your future, obviously. But so I did really like that. So thank you. Up next, Gary, and then Mona, because I think Gary wants to respond.
No, I was gonna say thank you, Penny. That was awesome. And when you were there when I gave my thesis presentation, and how the key point, it sounds really silly that I wrote my whole master's thesis to make the point that love means love, and when Jesus says love, he doesn't mean go kill your neighbor, you know, as Martin Luther and Vladimir Putin said. You know, he doesn't mean, you know, don't love somebody, or, you know, love them except when it hurts. It's just like, it really means what it basically means. And so, you know, this is something that Shrikant and I have had a little bit of a discussion, and we mentioned in there, is that it seems to these first 3 verses capture the entire ministry of Christ right there, as like everything you need to know about God is right there embodied in Jesus, who is like the embodied manifestation of God's character, and all he does is like relentlessly love. And then the only command he gives is to love. You know, and that this whole idea of eternal life is a qualitative aspect. It's eternity living in the present moment, as we embodied, you know, this character that's demonstrated, you know, through Jesus. And the gift that we received, and that's, I really kind of like keep drawing back to the idea of the Gospel of John as a retrospective, is that everything he's saying to the disciples is a message that's really being given to us, you know, generations later. We have the Spirit, which is the embodiment, is performing all the activities that Jesus did on earth. Jesus' entire earthly ministry is embodied through the power of the Spirit, which we have access to, enabling us, giving us the power to experience this eternity living in the now, and to just love, you know. And it's, for me, that's really powerful. And I'm taking an ethics class right now, a Christian ethics class, and they're just like, every position is an excuse not to love. You know, it's like, yeah, we want to love Jesus except when it hurts, or except when there's a border wall, or except when there's whatever else going on. And I was just like, oh, you know, it's exasperating. But yeah, I just wanted to say thank you for that.
Thank you, Gary, and thank you, Penny. Up next, I have Mona. Thank you for waiting, Mona.
That's all right. Thank you. I wanted to go back to the story with Peter and the feet, washing the feet, having his feet washed by Jesus. And then I thought about it, how excessive humility can be just as bad as excessive pride, that placing himself in a position where he thinks he's not worthy, he's denying the reality of Jesus actually being in his heart. So he's creating separation between Jesus and himself. It says Jesus is somewhere out there, and I'm here, this unworthy person. But then the heart of the prayer, it feels to me, is that Jesus is everywhere in everyone's heart. You just have to see him. And then not seeing him is what creates the separation. That's what I thought, I felt with this prayer.
Thank you, Mona. Just some thoughts about what you said. I never even saw it as when Peter didn't accept Jesus washing his feet, that it's a separation of him and Jesus, because that means that Jesus is not, that eh, I don't think it's that Jesus is not in Peter's heart, it's that Peter doesn't see it. And when you don't see it, it blinds you to your faults. And so how can you grow if you don't know what's going on, or where your faults are, right? And I think that's true for all of us. I think one of the things about having Jesus in our hearts, it isn't just some Christian, lingo that we use that's nonchalant. If we think about it, if you have Jesus in your heart, he changes who you are, and that he will have you see your faults and have you correct them and have you repent of them and have a life change. If you truly believe that Jesus is in your heart, because you will want to have the character of Jesus. And that's what we were talking about yesterday a little bit in Seneca and when we were reading the letters of Seneca, and we were talking about character and, people of character who you want to emulate. Like there are certain people that you want to emulate because of who they are, because of their character. And I think of Jesus as one of those people. And I think that if we're emulating Christ, if we really have Christ in our hearts and we're like, we see this character, this is someone who we would like to emulate or be like, then we have to accept the hard truths like of ourselves. And we have to accept that, like Gary was saying, we have to love people even if they're unlovable, right? Even if they hurt us, even if it hurts to love, you still are required to do it. Look what Jesus did. If we're going to really follow the character of someone, and since we're studying the Gospel of John and Jesus' life, and this prayer that he has, that God protect them, and he's asking on his disciples' behalf, like, now they know me, they have me in them, I have revealed your gifts to them, to the disciples, then they're taking on the characteristics of Jesus. So I think what was beautiful, what you said, Mona, when you said that, Peter was not accepting, service from Christ, that means he's not accepting Jesus into his heart, because, you have to accept help. You have to serve and allow others to serve you. That's a way practically, like, I think, we were talking about earlier, talking about, we got to accept service, like Joe was talking about earlier, accepting, you have to accept that people, just lost my train of thought, but that people really, that you have to accept help as well as give it, or otherwise you'll burn out, right? Practically. So I just think that was great. So thank you. Gary, did you have any thoughts before I move on? Okay, so up next I have Katie, followed by Joe.
Yeah, I think Gary, you talked about heart in the past too. I went to Bible study the other day and it was great because I think like the heart is a great like change of heart, like something changes inside of you first before you see the external change in external actions. And I think like now we'll even hear that by some politicians saying like winning hearts and minds. I think now it's a little bit more, we tend to think of it as a, change the mind. But I think the point really is that it has to be, the change comes internally first before you see the outside.
Thank you, Katie. I would tend to 100% agree with that. Um, there has to be a heart change before anything else happens, because then it's just superficial, I think. And, it's just outward, and it's just for attachment to things. You're just doing it for the reputation. Gary, any thoughts before I go to Nalini and then Joe?
Actually, it was kind of in response to what Katie just said. Was the popular verse that most of us could probably recall from memory is, out of the access of the heart does a person speak. That all the things that we do are manifestations of our true character, which is inside us. And so, yeah, that's exactly. Thank you, Katie.
Yeah, thank you, Katie. Up next, I have Nalini, Elizabeth, and Joe.
Hi. This is related to what I think, was it Mona or Penny? I don't remember who said about Peter not accepting, I guess, to wash his feet. Could it be that it's the reverence that you have for someone, that you don't want them to wash their feet? So that's why he didn't want Christ or Jesus to wash his feet. That is one question. The other question is, maybe Gary, you can shed some light again, and you might have done it already. I don't understand it. It is, Father, the time has come. Glorify your Son, and your Son may glorify you. If you can just explain a little bit more. Why is he asking Father, or I guess, Father is the God, to glorify? I mean, I don't know. I am kind of confused, I think, about that statement, or not that text.
Is it okay if I respond now, and before the other people?
Absolutely. Yeah. Go for it.
So Nalini, the Gospel of John uses the word glory in a different way than most of the other Gospels, and even the Old Testament uses it. It's the same but different. The word glory carries with it this idea of splendor, of seeing something fantastic. In the other three Gospels, there's this moment where Jesus goes up onto a mountain, and you have this transfiguration where he's bright and shining white, and they see him, and it's a parallel with Moses seeing God's glory, and it was so bright that he can't see, he can't look at it. When we get to the Gospel of John, none of that is there. There's no clothes changing, there's nothing. And throughout the first 11 chapters, is they call this the book of signs, is where Jesus is performing his different signs. We're told again and again that his hour has not yet come. The hour of his glorification has not yet come. And then beginning in chapter 12, it's this pivot where Jesus says, now is the Son of Man glorified. And in the Gospel of John, that glory always points to actually his death on the cross. And so he does this upside down kingdom, that when Jesus is glorified, he's glorified through the example of his humility, through the example of his suffering, and that somehow God's character, his name, and his true being is made manifest through that sacrifice on the cross. And that's what's taking place with the foot washing and everything else that's happening, is that God is his glory becomes manifested in all the disciples when they allow themselves to humbly serve. That's when they actually they glorify his name. His character of God is truly seen as we serve, not by being the Roman emperor, not by having armies, not by having power, not by telling other people what to do, by relinquishing our attachment to the world and serving people who are in need. And so that's John's depiction of glory that's
Mhm.
taking place. And so if you see glory and Jesus saying, why is all of a sudden he's saying be glorified and whatnot? What's going on? You know, in
I
John,
read about,
the opposite.
I'm sorry, I interrupted. I read about, the crucifixion, and that's what it refers to, but I still didn't understand. So thank you. I'm sorry, I don't know much about it, so I was really confused. And
No, you're doing very well. That's a perfect question. And it's like my professors tell me is if you have a question, odds are there's 5 more people who have the same question who are scared to speak up. And so thank you for asking.
thank you for clarifying that. That helped a lot.
Thank you, Nalini. And just, one thing I think it's wonderful, even for people who study the Bible for a while, we just take it for granted that we know something. And so when you bring up those questions like that, and I say this to the whole group, when you bring up questions that you may think are beginner questions, they're really, for people who study this for a while, they're really reminder questions too, because sometimes we can take it for granted that we know something. So it also helps us too. So thank you.
Thank you. And Gary, what about the second one? Washing the feet. And I think, I don't know, I think, was it Penny or Mona? One of them said that, when you don't accept it, Peter didn't accept, or Peter didn't, I don't know exactly what she said, but I just asked a question, could it be that he revered Jesus so much that he didn't want his feet to be washed by him?
I lots of people comment on it,
Oh,
and there's lots of different opinions on it. One is that Peter is acting impulsively.
mhm,
He's like all of us, is that we react to things as opposed to mindfully responding to them.
mhm,
And so, and oftentimes the different disciples are stand-ins for normal human responses, how any of us might reply. And so Peter manifests how maybe how any reader might initially respond to the master washing their feet, so there's, as a literary device, that Peter's objection represents the affront that anybody would have to have the God man come and wash our feet. We'd be like, what's going on there? And then the correction that, I think Aquinas brings this up too, and in the text there's a correction. The real correction is that Peter is ignorant. He doesn't understand what is happening. And that's, again, that speaks to when we react to any stimulus that happens, there's not a lot of thought. It's just a gut response. It's not mindful at all. And that's, there's kind of that check, that we're asked to check ourselves in at that. But that's the big one that seems to be in the text itself, is that he is responding ignorantly. It's not irreverence, or maybe even too reverent, as he honestly doesn't know what's happening. And Jesus says, hey, unless you let me do this, you don't have any part with me. And then his response is just to the opposite extreme. Well, in that case, don't stop with my feet, wash my arms and my body and my head also. He's just like, there's no middle ground with him. Again, it's like, I think it's more than anything, Peter is describing the propensity of all of us to react to stimulus without thinking, to just go with the gut. And there's something endearing about the passion, but it's also an ignorant passion.
thank you. Thank you so much.
Joe, did you want to add something real quick? I saw you waving your hand.
No, I mean, I think that it's a very good question that I think is worth diving into, because I think it relates back to this passage in particular, but it just in brief, part of spiritual liberation that Christ's offering people is that you have an active faith, and that faith is to believe in God. And to not believe in God in that particular instance, Peter was saying, he may have felt very humble, and that's appropriate, but he's not thoughtful, like Gary said. He's not demonstrating faith in God. And when you move your faith away from God, and what the whole point was, is that he's like, I'm showing you an example of how to be. I'm a slave. I'm doing what a slave does. I'm serving you. You're supposed to be serving others. So he's missing the point of why Christ is doing it in the first place. And what he's denying in that is, as Mona had said, he's creating a separation as to when he knows what's right, as opposed to when God knows what's right. And that creates a separation that no longer allows you to enjoy the freedom of your faith in truth, or belief in truth. So, I mean, in short, that's what that's what was, kind of the way I see that. And that comes back to exactly what we're talking about even tonight, that the disciples that have been selected to take part, as they're, he's speaking to the Father as if these are the individuals that obeyed and have come along with me. That that they have accepted God's teachings, not without obviously making mistakes in the interim. But if they were to deny those teachings, then at that point they're no longer following God. So I think that's where the hubris kind of comes in the sense that you can't pick and choose when you want to be right, or when it's if it's faith in something bigger than yourself. And if you really want to dig deep, when to do the right thing, when right action is appropriate to take, you don't pick and choose that. You know what it is, right? In our daily lives, we know when we're doing something wrong. So therefore, we may not like the options that we have in front of us, but we need to take them anyway. So that's, so in a way, Peter he may not have liked having to receive the gift that Christ was offering him, but it was important that he received it.
Thank you, Joe. Up next, I have Elizabeth and Oscar. Thank you both for waiting patiently.
I just had a question about something that Katie J said. She was talking earlier about how the part she liked was the change. I think she said the change must come from within. It must come from the heart. Okay, it's not coming from outside. It's coming from within you. So I'm gonna take that out of context and like in everyday, like put it in like everyday life, like just random situations. Okay. So if you have a change of heart, or if you have something that was put inside you, now whether that decision was yours or whether it came from God, that I don't know. But you have something that you have come to the conclusion, okay, you have decided something, and then you go out there and you share that because it's going to be public knowledge. So you share that decision, and then somebody comes along and says, oh, well, that's not right. no, this is what you should be doing. That's totally wrong. And how do you, like, what would you say to something like that if you have a real, change of heart inside, but when you speak it out loud, people shut it down, you know?
Gary, did you want to take that one?
I was actually thinking a little bit on this.
And I should, sorry, Gary, I should also mention, when they shut it down, I'm not saying they have malevolent reasons. I don't know what they are, but I know it could, it could be that they're shutting it down because they have a limited view of the world. So in their limited view, they only see this. They don't see everything, right? So it could be any number of reasons why they're shutting it down that I don't know.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I'm experiencing that in another sphere of my life, at present. Um, I think the analogy that I can give you, which is kind of an imperfect analogy of what you're getting at, and Joe might be able to identify with this. I was teaching a class and I was spending hours and hours and staying late, sometimes to 8 or 10 o'clock at night preparing curricula for this class that I was teaching. And the teachers were asking like, hey, why don't you just wing it? And in my mind I was like, well, I don't know enough to just wing it. like I don't think I could possibly do any less and competently teach the class. And then somebody else said, I don't think it's in you to do any less. And this is probably, I'm trying to try an analogy of what we mean when we talk about virtue ethics. It's so a part of our being that this is how we act in the world, and these are the things that we say. And so getting, so it's not like I could just wing it or call it in for the day. If I don't have that knowledge base, there's something about me and my virtue that if I'm going to go teach this class, I want to make certain that I have a good curriculum for the people that are paying money to be there, that I fulfill that role of instructor, that I don't just like say, okay, I'm tired today, I'll give it a rest for whatever else it is. It's just part of who I'm being, and it's not possible for me to do less without denying that. That didn't happen overnight. That's something that gets cultivated over time. And so getting back to your analogy, it's like there's these things that you decide that you want to do or you want to say or you want to share, and there you might be in a middle ground where you're actually trying to create or define for yourself the virtues or the kind of person that you want to be. And the reality is, and this is what the disciples are encountering in the farewell discourse, is that the world is opposed to that. And until my character is fully developed, it's an obstacle to confront people that are opposing that. And so I kind of want to give you a little bit of comfort, is that with the exception of the Apostle John, in the Gospel of John, all the disciples either deny or run away from Jesus. That this virtue, this cultivating virtue, is a process. It's moral progress. It takes time. We make mistakes on the way. We make a decision, we get an idea, we have a conviction of what we want to be, and then we try again and again and again until we get there. Another example, and this just pops off the top of my head, is the very first patriarch, Abraham, gets called in Genesis 12. And the story of his life is of stumbling and making mistakes continually all the way up through Genesis 22. So the whole 10 chapters of Abraham's life is just mistake after mistake after mistake. And so, take some comfort. Don't feel like a complete failure if you have an idea of what you're trying to be. Keep plodding on towards that. It's going to take time. But yeah, not knowing specifically what you're talking about, we might go head to head and argue. Who knows? That's all I got to say.
Okay, thank you. No argument for me. But yeah, it's interesting. I agree that it would take time. But then I also think maybe maybe I don't need to share whatever is within me, you know? Maybe I can just keep it private because I'm going to get opposition anyways. So I can just keep it private and, you know, for as long as possible until absolutely necessary. And then I can deal with the repercussions then.
If I could just offer something really quick to that, I think sometimes, you know, I see the reason why you want to do that, and you know, it's your choice, and I don't think there's a right or wrong answer, but um, I should say and because but negates everything, right? Um, and um, and I think there's a benefit to putting your ideas out there and allowing them to be criticized, because then it can do two things. Either it can have you look at something differently and see a different perspective on it. That could also be true. Or it can confirm your belief, right? And you know, we're assuming that the people who are talking are not, as you said, are not doing it in a malicious way or not trying to be malicious. And I think most people are not. They're trying to learn. There are some people out there, and you will know who's trying to be malicious. And I would just say you don't need to respond to that, because why? But for those people that are truly out there to learn, when you put your ideas out there for conversation and you open yourself for different perspectives, I wouldn't even call it criticism. I would just call it, you know, a different perspective. You can see, you know, if your idea proves true or not. So I would just offer that. And I think that's one of the things that we do here at 52 Living Ideas is that, you know, we sometimes disagree. We sometimes put our ideas out there, right? And that's like what's on our heart, or, you know, we put it out there and we open it up for people to comment on it. And it's a good thing because then it tests what is true and what is not. And us.
Okay. Thank you. That's great, Evanique. So you're saying, yeah, you can share it. And even if people oppose or criticize it, it doesn't matter because one way or another, hopefully it would solidify what is what I'm doing anyway. You know, it would either solidify it or it would, I don't know. I don't know what else would happen, but it would reconfirm, like you said, what I'm believing in.
Yeah. And it, like I said, it opens you up to a new perspective or a new way to look at it, right? So,
Mhm.
yeah. So thank you for that, Elizabeth.
Thanks.
Up next, I have Oscar, followed by Joe.
All right, good evening, everyone. I hope I'm able to put this quick and precise. So I was thinking about the situation where Jesus is washing Peter's feet, and I'm looking at it somewhat different. Now I understand that God is loving, and there is no bounds, but from my understanding, it's a love that is not forced upon. It's a love that it's your option. You're choosing whether you want to receive it or not. So thinking at it from that point of view, the situation of Peter and Jesus washing his feet, I see that as an act that was forced upon Peter, and I think that's the reason why he hesitated, or he's hesitant about the fact that Jesus decided to wash his feet without, I think maybe because he didn't ask. And I think this also goes back to what Elizabeth was just commentating on. I think the situation, well, from what I understand is if you have an idea, there has to be a space where new ideas or different ideas are received. If that space isn't there, then you offering your ideas is kind of going to go against you. So, but anyway, back to what I was saying, I wanted to know what you guys thought about that. Thank you.
Gary, did you want to add anything?
It's going to take me a little bit to collect my thoughts on that one.
Okay, so,
What popped in my head actually was a study that was done, I think, in the 70s called the Good Samaritan Study. Has anybody else heard of this one, or have I brought it up before? And so Oscar, what they did is they got a bunch of people, seminary students that were learning to be pastors, and then they sat them through a lecture and then told them to run across, this is at Princeton Seminary, Theological Seminary, and they sent them across campus to go give a speech on the Good Samaritan. And what these people didn't realize is they had arranged for somebody to be sitting there in need along the way, unavoidably in their way, in their path. Usually the guy, it was an actor that was like lying, maybe, like he was passed out. And what's interesting is that most everybody, they tended to just walk past him because they were in a rush to get to their appointment. Even after hearing a talk on the Good Samaritan and the importance of being loving, and in a couple of instances, people stepped over the guy's body, in their hurry to get to their next appointment. And so there's this preponderance of people, even seminary students, who decline to follow the example of service, even in a lab setting when we actually watch them. But one of the things that stood out to me is there were a couple of people, people that did help. And in a couple of instances in particular, they were so insistent on helping the person that even when they said, "I'm fine, I don't need any more help," like the students wouldn't leave them alone. And the guy had to like really emphatically like shove him off and say, "Get out of my face. I'm done here." It's just like they were just so insistent on helping him. So I don't know if that parallels you, but that's kind of like, this is an example in life situation. We kind of orchestrated it and looked at a bunch of people and got to see how it looks out kind of in real life in a sense.
Okay, so I understand what you're saying, but my question would be, do you think it's fair to force your love upon someone rather than
Short
giving
answer, no.
someone ask? Okay. So basically those students going over the man instead of those students that force their need to give service without him asking was wrong in doing. I mean, would you say?
Well, I mean, the person that's like, passed out with a heart attack and we're helping them, are we forcing, or like the guy didn't ask for help?
Well, I mean, that's different, of course, but
Yeah. Whereas when the person says, "I don't want your help, go away."
yeah.
Yeah, that's so I also work in psych, and that's actually a really common thing is people are involuntarily committed and then they're sitting there and so they can't get away. And then you have some people that show up and they just get in their face and say, "You need help," and I'm going to give it to you. And the guy's like, "To get out of my face." But the thing that is most helpful in both ministry and in psychiatry is something called a ministry of presence. Is I don't force myself, but what I do is I offer myself as a presence. And then when you're ready and you need or you want help, if I'm the person that you seek, then I'm available for that.
Okay.
And sometimes it's literally, that's what we're asked to do, is simply show up. And that might relate to a little bit of what Elizabeth was asked. Sometimes you just show up. You don't have to do anything, just be present.
thank you, Oscar. Up next, I have Joe, followed by Katie.
Yeah, there's a lot of things going through my head. But I'm trying to. I think it's important to kind of relate some of the metaphors that we've talked about here in the past. And one of those metaphors that I think is very important to think about is the way. and how, and when we're talking about this passage in particular, where Jesus says, you know, the way to the place where I am going, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. So essentially there's the idea that this is the reason why you ought to be following Christ. And this is kind of reiterated in the verses that we're talking about right now, whether it be verse 8, for I gave them the words you gave me, and they accepted them. They knew with certainty that I come from you, and they believed that you sent me. So there's this faith component that Christ is established in earlier in the way, in the text, that he is the way. And then in this part of the chapter, he's establishing the fact that they've demonstrated in faith. And the reason that's important, and it comes back to Oscar's question, is that either, you know, and going back to actually maybe your comments last week, Oscar, which actually might also help with this. If you were to take this as metaphor and use the way as a metaphor in that particular instance, then you're not being forced upon, you're just denying. And there's a distinction between those two. So if you're taking this story to be true, and that there is a truth, there's a light and a darkness, which is basis of all classical philosophy, right? In a way. Then you're denying, and not necessarily having something thrust upon you. You're not accepting. And as I think actually, Oscar, you had brought up the Garden of Eden last week as well. You know, it was a denial to God, essentially, that denied God's one request, and God is still, you know, and yes, you're right. You're given an option, but the point of us, I see you put in the chat, forced or given an option. Yeah, you're given an option. Absolutely. You were given an option in the Garden of Eden as well. Just there's consequences to your decision. So no different than with Peter. And I guess the reason why I think it's important to think about this is that if you're using the metaphor as the way, as being a path to eternal life, then that denying the way would be essentially, you know, denying God. So for this metaphor, I mean, it absolutely works. Whether it be thrust, it's a decision that you can make. You just may not like the results. That's all. I mean, so there's no forcing per se. In fact, you do absolutely have a choice. Just may not get the result you want. Anyway, that's just a thought.
Thank you, Joe. Sure. Up next, we have Katie. Oh, wait, he's left. Katie, go ahead.
Yeah, Gary, the story of the Good Samaritan came to you. The first story that came to my mind was the prodigal son. and how, like, you know, God's always there, you can kind of drift away, and then, but then you kind of always come back to, like, and I think people generally can really be like that, where, you know, that they can start to wander off and do the wrong thing, and then they realize, oh, that doesn't make any sense, and then they come right back to where, and God's like, well, I'm always here for you.
Thank you, Katie. Yeah, I think this has really been like one of those discussions I think this is one of those passages that's really, I don't want to say difficult, but it's deep. Because it broaches so many different areas, right? Um, you know, I feel like 17 is like, you know, this prayer that Jesus has is like, I've given all that I can. I've told them everything, they know everything. I feel like they're prepared. Um, good night, Elizabeth. Thank you so much. And I think, you know, with this passage, I think it's so deep and it has so many different meanings, right? There's so many different things in here. And as I was listening to everybody's questions, I think what I'm getting for this for myself is that I need to read it again and really maybe study the Aquinas commentary on it. And really just understand it more, because I think, you know, one of the things, I'm just going to go back to the scripture. I mean, we've only done 1 to 11, right? So I think, and he says in the beginning, the Father, the hour has come. So he knows that he's not going to be with his disciples much longer, right? And then you look at it and it says, glorify your son so he can give glory back to you. And that was a great question from Nalini about what glorify your son means. Like, he doesn't mean like in a sense like give him power, or as we think of glory as this great thing. Jesus says, glorify me so I can give the glory back to you. It's kind of like I'm about to sacrifice myself, because we all know what's coming next. You know, I'm going to sacrifice myself so that you know, I can give the glory back to you, because when I'm raised from the dead, everything that has happened in the scripture that has been said in the Old Testament will be proven true through me. But look what he has to go through in order to do that. Look at the pain, look at the suffering. He becomes, I think we were talking about this last week, he becomes the scapegoat, right? He has to take on all the sins of the world. And so I think when what this passage here, I'm not going to read through the whole thing again, but I think it says he gives eternal life to each one of you have given him. And I think of that and I'm like, you know, he means eternal life right here, right now. Like, you're going to live your life as if you're going to, you know, as if you're not living it for the physical world. You're living it for the spiritual world, but you're doing that in the physical world, and you're showing through your life who Jesus is. Now the disciples, after they go through the crucifixion and they go through the fear, they're going to become the representatives of Jesus. If you think about it, people are going to see Jesus through them, through their heart. And so I just think, you know, all that to say is that, you know, that it's just one of those things where it's so hard to understand, because you could just go you could just go on and on about it. But I'm gonna let Joe have a turn at it, because a lot of it I really, you know, when you study it in school, it's just this one quick thing and you're like, okay, you don't even look at it as the deepest passage. You look at it as, when I was studying it in school, and I'm talking about Catholic school, it was almost like the penultimate, but not really. Like, we didn't study it like the penultimate. It was just kind of like, okay, this is the thing that's about to happen before the major thing, but it's not really that permanent. He's praying to God to give him strength, right? Before he goes through this whole torture. But the real story is the cross. But I think the real story is here. And so it's just so much more I have to think about. But it's giving me a lot to think about. So thank you, Gary. Any thoughts before I go to Joe? No? Okay. Joe, you're up.
So I have a very difficult question. I almost feel badly asking it, Gary. So if you tell me you want to wait a week, that's fine. But perhaps we can explore, since we are talking about glory, the distinction between glory and faith. If you would make one.
For me, we're back to this. I think it's an artificial distinction
Okay.
between the form and the substance, and we're back to that whole, what's his name? Louis Sullivan, form follows function, in
Right.
architecture, in biology, anatomy and physiology is form and function. My professor made me excise all this stuff out of my thesis because I just kept going on and on. It's like no matter what academic discipline you go to, form follows function. Like
Absolutely.
they're united no matter what it is. And that by itself, that principle is what attracted me to virtue ethics over, deontology or utilitarianism or many of the other forms of ethics, because it just seems consistent with the universal principle that form follows function. And so what's taking place here is that by having faith in Jesus, that's really what's taking place in the first three verses, is that, this is eternal life, that they would know you, is that when you have this knowledge, how do you not respond to that?
Mhm.
If you actually believe that this is true, how does it not have an internal manifestation or a change in your heart? And so then form follows function. And that's the thing that I brought up about the Gospel of John and glory, is just how the Father is glorified in Jesus, ultimately in the cross, but we see the foot washing as like the key point that's of his earthly ministry. That's the embodiment of Jesus' entire earthly ministry comes to a head. It was a Catholic theologian. He phrased it better than I did, and I can't find the phrase right now. But in that foot washing, that captures it. The only thing more that Jesus could do, he did next, which was beyond the cross. And then, we're here in the Gospel of John going over it, but Paul uses the same language again and again and again. And I think that if John wrote later, I think that he was really familiar with Paul, because, Paul talks about, if any man, I mean, it just talks about bearing in our bodies the dying of the Lord Jesus, constantly. Mm-hmm. And you have Philippians who, consider Jesus, who, did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, but took on the form of a bondservant, and humbled himself to the point of death, even the death on the cross. That the affinities of that to the foot washing and this farewell discourse, like every commentator from ancient history to the present sees that association. That glory and faith are just form and function. It's right there. Which leads me, like again, when I have these ethical discussions with people about, sometimes they're hot button issues, like, the border wall and immigration and, abortion or whatever else it is, regardless of how anybody feels on it. It's like our response can't be just this canned response of like whatever the political zeitgeist says. is we really need to be asking ourselves is, how do I respond to this in a way that embodies Christ's glory as demonstrated through his ministry? What is the Christ-like response to it for me, regardless of what political philosophy I might adhere to? What am I called to do as a human being? And it's an interesting thing. I hope that answers your question.
I mean, and no, it's an amazing answer. I mean, you couldn't have answered it any more clearly. And so, I mean, because it was a really difficult question, and you're right, they are different ways of knowing God, and so, yeah, I think the form follows function example actually is perfect for exactly what I was asking, and it brought complete clarity between the two. So yeah, you did answer that. Yeah, and I also appreciated the use of how you explained virtue ethics, in the sense that yes, you have to do, it transcends social norms, and that's the most, one of the most powerful things about it, and it's the reason why I think it works. It works for me personally, but it also works on a meta level as well. So thank you for that. That was a tough question. That was a tough question. That was a tough question, and it was a really, really good answer. A really good answer.
Thank you, Gary, and thank you, Joe. I just wanted to bring up one more thing before we closed out, but just gotta get back to it. Give me 1 second. It's the last part I wanted to discuss was actually verse 11. Now I am departing from the world. They are staying in this world, but I am coming to you. Holy Father, you have given me your name. Now protect them by the power of your name, so that they will be united just as we are. And that last line I never really noticed, so that they are united just as we are. So he's talking about obviously his disciples, right? And not only does he want them to be protected, but he wants them to be united. And I think of it in this world where we, as if we're disciples or if we're Christians, we're supposed to be united, and we have all of these divisions because we're and I would say this, Gary, when you gave the book, The Untidy Faith, a couple weeks back, and I've been reading that, and so it just makes it even clearer that when you are going for the attachment in this world, and it talks about it in the Gita, it also talks about it, well, yeah, it talks about it mostly in the Gita, but I think it has a flavor of it in the Tao too, that you're attached to like what people think of you, or what people think of the faith, actually. And it's kind of one of those weird dichotomies, because in a sense, when Christians are saying, you have to follow these rules, you have to follow these practices, which are man-made rules, which are not in the Bible, and they're like, well, we're following it, but you're not. It's not. They're doing it in the name of Christ, and I think for the most part people mean well, but they're stuck in their head about what they think is right, and they're not even being open to the simple fact that there can be something else. And I think they have taken, like when you said form follows function, that's what made me think of it, because I'm like, they're taking the form and they're trying to turn it into a function. And when you reverse that, like the phrases form follows function, but when function follows form, you see the deterioration of the faith, right? You see the deterioration. It's not Jesus. It's not about Jesus. It's not about unity. It's about I and right, and I know the way, and the other people don't know the way. And so when I see that, I'm like, wow, we've forgotten what unifies us. It's the Bible. And when it says in that last part where it says, let them be unified as me and you are unified, that means it's kind of like, I hate to use the word one thought because I don't think that's it. But no matter what, God and Jesus are always together. Even when Jesus was, in the Garden of Gethsemane and he's saying, please, God, take this from me. I don't want to do this. I don't want to go through it. I don't think I can do this. And God's like, do it. And he's like, okay, I will do it. And I think of that, and I think that's the type of unity that he wants. It's like, we each are charged with like guiding each other in the right direction, but making sure that our hearts are good as well, and making sure that we accept correction and we accept if we're going off the path to go back on. But looking at it as God and Jesus are unified, we're supposed to be unified. And what that does for us as human beings, I think of the Gita again, where it says the God in me sees the God in you. So no matter if we're having even a disagreement, it shouldn't be the thing that tears us apart. If we see things differently, it shouldn't be the thing that tears us apart. We should respect that and see the God within everyone. And so it's like it should keep you unified. And so when I see that, and I've never, as many times as I've read this passage, I've never seen that like quite like that than when you did this tonight, when we did this tonight. So thank you for that. And those are just like some of the final thoughts I have. I know Joe has something he wants to say.
Yeah, no, I think that's an excellent point, Evanique, the verse that you brought up. And it's deep on a number of levels. It reads slightly differently in the version that I have, where it says, so that they may be one as we are one. And that is absolutely essential if you want to really understand the gospel, because essentially the way that Christ is connected to us is through the Holy Spirit. So this idea of the Holy Spirit is pretty much embodied in that. So when we are one, meaning isn't that I haven't abandoned you. This is the idea of Christ dying and being connected to everyone. So this is part of the reason in chapter 14, he pretty much introduces the idea of the Holy Spirit. It's essentially called the helper. And so we talked about that during our discussion on metaphors as well. And I think that if we really, think about this in terms of metaphors, we can we can look at each passage so much deeper. So by Evanique highlighting that line in particular, we start to see the way Christ connects to the disciples and how he guides them even after his death. And so speaking about that unity, is essentially the basically what empowers people that believe in God. So, or believe in Christ anyway, in this particular instance. So I think that, that could very well have been lost to me as well. And the beauty of actually having going through these texts, speaking through them, and thinking about them more deeply, asking Gary impossible questions, and doing those things, that we get something different each time we go through the text. And I think that that's one of the reasons this text is so deep, is that you go through it many times and you can have a number of different perspectives on it. We've heard various perspectives and different questions, different thoughts, just this evening alone. So, and even, you calling out that last line, what does it mean to be unified? And we have to think about the whole entirety of the gospel of John, not just even this passage. But if you ask yourself that one question just based off of that line, you have a deeper understanding. Now, you'll be able to articulate what is meant by the Holy Spirit, the connection of God, between, and the relationship between God the Father, God the Son, and the disciples themselves. So anyway, I thought it was a very important point to bring up, and I'm glad you did it.
Thank you, Joe. I really appreciate that. Especially coming from you. So thank you. Up next, I have Gary.
Oh, I'm good. I see that we're like nearing the end of our time, so I'm perfectly fine.
You sure? You can always say what you need to say.
I'll make it quick then. I was actually kind of like building on like what Joe was saying, is that the first part of that verse that you quoted is Holy Father, keep them in your name, the name which you have given me, so that they may be one as we are one. And so it's that unity is being captured in the unity with the name and the character of God. And that's how Jesus shares he is the expression of God. He is united with God in character. Show us the Father. Well, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. And so that statement from way back in John 14 is, I think Joe is really pulling it together here, is that's what's being hearkened to right here, is you've given me your name, and now he's saying keep them, so that they may be one as we are one. We have that unity will be manifest as we do what Jesus did, as we reflect the Father in the same way that Jesus reflects the Father, if that makes sense. And that's the sad and funny catch of when you get to the end of chapter 15 and the beginning of chapter 16, is people will persecute you in Jesus' name, thinking that they're offering a service to God. These divisions are going to happen. And so the unity that's being asked for here isn't just an agreement amongst people. It's a unity with the Father. I guess that's what I'm getting at. That's what's being signified.
Yeah, I think that was beautifully said. I think especially when you said, as Jesus reflects the Father, we're reflecting Jesus, which therefore we are reflecting the Father. And I think that's a beautiful point to remember, right? I think that's a beautiful point to remember, that that's who we are. If we're, and for people here who don't, who are learning about Christ or don't, believe in Christ, I think it's a higher power, right? If you're looking for a higher power, you're looking for a way to guide yourself or something of that nature, whatever you're using, because I think the Gita provides the same beautiful way of, we're also reflecting the God within us, right? So I think it's a universal principle. So I think that's beautiful. Oscar, you have a comment.
No, it's not a comment. It's a question. So before last week's session went off, you guys spoke about a meetup on Fridays, or last Friday. I'm not sure if it was a one-time thing or it's an occurring thing. Stoicism.
Seneca.
Yeah, can you?
Seneca's letters.
Can you send me the link to that? I was trying to look for it last Friday and I couldn't find it anywhere.
Yeah, I'll put the link in.
Okay, thank you.
Right. Sorry, folks, I had to go, but what's the situation now? What's going on?
We just finished.
You just finished? Evanique,
I
can
asked
count
Gary
on
the
you
most
to give me a
impossible
straight answer. Evanique, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. What was the question?
What's the state? How far are we? What are we doing?
Well, we were talking about verses 1 to 11. So I think the consensus is that we're really deep. I'll give you the quick highlights.
Yes.
Basically we started talking about the end of 11 where it talks about let me just read it really quick. It says during that last part, now protect them by the power of your name so that they will be united just as we are. And that's between Jesus and God, like that they're united just as God and Jesus are united. And we were discussing how deep that point is. And we were and how deep that point is, basically. And what is it calling us to do? And one of the things I was saying is kind of a universal principle because if you think about it, it is one of those things where it's a universal principle. Like in the Gita, it says the God in me sees the God in you. Well, you also have to be a reflection of the God in you, right? So it's one of those things where you think it appears to be just for Christians, but it's not. Joe had a really good question. Joe, you want to tell us to recount what it is, because I will butcher it.
Yeah, that was completely unfair. It was an unfair question between.
Joe, just tell me the question. Don't give me the answer. Just give me the question.
It's the how do you distinguish between faith and glory?
Faith and glory.
And they're both forms of knowledge of God. And actually, Gary came up with the perfect answer using your method. So he actually stole from you. So it was forms follows function. He used it as, but beautifully.
Okay, so Gary, go ahead. What's the answer? What's the difference between glory and faith?
What I was telling Joe is that's why I find myself so gravitated towards virtue ethics, because in all the disciplines, this idea of form and function, they're united everywhere you go. And so oh, Shrikant has a phone call.
No, I don't have a phone call. I just want to keep my phone with me. That's it. Go ahead.
So in architecture, that was Louis Sullivan brought up form and function. We see the same thing in anatomy and physiology, and it's like we could just go from discipline to discipline. That the idea and the thing are united, and then we even with the idea of metaphor. And this guy John Walton, an Old Testament scholars, talks about the use of metaphors in the Hebrew Bible. Is that these function is what is being communicated through the metaphor, not just the form, that the form and the function are united. And so when we get to faith and glory, that's why I just really enjoy virtue ethics, is that when you have the faith, it just produces the fruit. That's just part of who it is. If you really honestly believe what it is that you believe, then it can't not have a transformative effect on your life. And with the Gospel of John, we had already talked about what is the glory in the Gospel of John. The glory is in Jesus' humility. The glory is manifested in the foot washing. The glory is manifested in the cross. And so that's the form and the function. That's the faith and the glory.
Interesting. I was reading Aquinas today on that topic, and it's very interesting, like the way he understands it. And I've never really so it's all of this is so difficult, So the glory is basically, as best as I understand it, and Gary would love to hear your comments on this. So glory is all about saying, this is the most important thing in the world. So when you say that this is the most important thing in the world, then you're glorifying it. So that's what it means to say that, I glorify God. You're saying that I think that this is the great thing, the greatest thing in the world. So Aquinas makes very careful distinctions between what good Gentiles do, that they appreciate the creation of God, but they don't glorify God in the same way because they glorify other things. So this is saying that, that God is all that matters. And so that is my understanding of glory, of being completely focused on that as being the source of all value. Aquinas calls faith as imperfect, in the sense that, like, you have a faith that is what it is, and you want to go in that direction. You're trying to go in that direction, but you're not there yet. So it's like for example, when Jesus is saying, glorify me, by, in the original position that I was in. So he's saying that oneness, that focusedness on God is what I want to go back to. So you are actually with God. So faith is not full. It's like you're trying to get there, but glory seems higher to me of you actually doing. So that's what I got from Aquinas. What do you think, Gary?